I think the eye poke right now is probably the scariest thing in MMA.
Yeah. With the UFC gloves, you put those on, your hand wants to be open, and you have to kind of close it and tighten it down.
To say fighters have been dissatisfied with MMA gloves would be an understatement.
The worst part of the night for me when I fight is putting those gloves on.
The finger holes are very tight. That's why my hands are all cut up.
These things are straight trash. They're very thin. There's like nothing to them.
But as the UFC flip-flops on its choice of equipment, can the problems surrounding the gloves ever be solved?
Yeah, those gloves suck.
Today we look at the evolution of MMA and the pivotal role that gloves have played in transforming the sport, and explore possible alternatives that, for whatever reason, have gone unused.
You are about to see something that you have never seen before. The Ultimate Fighting Challenge.
When the UFC first started, of course, there were no gloves. Fighters fought bare knuckles and little thought was given to any rules, let alone accidental eye pokes. This wasn't a rule enforced by the UFC. Fighters were welcome to wear gloves if they wanted to. But it was obvious even to early UFC competitors that wearing boxing gloves would be a clear hindrance in grappling. There was of course the late Art Jimerson who decided to try wearing one glove. But this was never adopted as common practice for obvious reasons.
He just tapped out.
The first time someone tried to use MMA gloves was Felix Mitchell at UFC 3, but Big John McCarthy told him he wasn't allowed to use them. This caused a little bit of confusion and controversy. The UFC growing at a rapid rate, it needed to change with the times if it wanted to become mainstream.
Groin punching, hair pulling, headbutting, all of that was allowed. Senator John McCain, famously called the sport barbaric, like human cockfighting.
By UFC 14, new rules would be put in place, and fighters now had to wear mouth guards, groin protectors, and gloves. But you could still wear a gi. This isn't to say the UFC invented mandatory MMA gloves. The Japanese promotion Shudo required athletes to wear fingerless Kempo-style gloves back in 1985. But as one problem is solved, another springs up elsewhere, the gloves themselves.
I do poke people in the eyes, and it's very illegal, but I do it.
When we listen to critics of the UFC glove, we mostly hear of two main points of contention. Those are eye pokes.
You don't see right now?
I can't see anything out of my left eye.
Black. It's
black.
The eye poke was pretty bad, man.
Yeah, honestly, I thought I lost my eye. No, he poked me in the eye bad one time.
Oh my dear, look at that.
And broken hands.
On the last minute, I think I broke my hand.
I broke it in the Holloway fight.
Did you break your hand?
Yeah. The first one.
First punch?
Yeah.
Did you break your arm at some point in the fight?
Just a scratch.
You broke your hand. You at least believe you broke your hand in the first round. You may have broken it. When do you think you actually hurt it?
Very first right hand, man.
4 more rounds with a broken finger.
A study found that between 2016 and 2019, approximately 6% of all injuries suffered inside the UFC octagon were broken hands from striking an opponent, and many pointed to flaws in the design of the glove as the cause.
Look at that big space. For me, I broke my hand multiple times. I'm not a fan of this big open space.
The more significant and pressing issue for most people, however, this often leaves fans not only resentful of fighters they believe to be doing the poking intentionally.
Jones put his finger in his eye, the dirtiest fighter in MMA.
But also resentful because the truth is, there are other options out there. Over the years, the UFC has seemed irrationally reluctant to try out new gloves and experiment with new ideas to prevent eye poking. But what other options are truly out there? The alternative glove you hear spoken about as an alternative most often is the old school Pride glove.
Next glove I'm gonna show you guys beats all these gloves by 100 years. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the Pride gloves.
Many consider this to be the premier design when it comes to MMA gloves, providing sufficient support whilst also curving the hand to make eye pokes less frequent.
And you have a little padding right here, and the leather is probably the best leather out of all the gloves I've ever used.
But there is also the ONX glove, developed by famous trainer Trevor Whitman, who has championed the gloves as the next level of glove design up from the Pride version.
Bro, listen, man, the best gloves for sure are Trevor Whitman's. The best gloves. Trevor Whitman's a genius, man.
The gloves had the same curving feature as the old Pride gloves, and they were endorsed by a number of fighters working with Whitman.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's curved right away.
Yeah, curved right away. And then when you...
That's way better. Yeah, like the old Pride gloves.
Yeah.
Not only that, but Dana himself seemed to be a fan of the gloves, and the idea of maybe bringing them in.
Dana loved the gloves. He was blown away by them.
But problems arose when the UFC wanted to own the gloves outright, while Trevor wanted to be able to sell them to other promotions, so the whole MMA community could benefit.
They wanted to own the technology because all of our stuff is patented. I've went through the patenting processes. I've put
So the company
6
that makes
years.
the UFC gloves wants to own your shit.
Completely.
Then there is the glove used by Risen, commonly accepted by those in the know as the best glove used by any promotion in modern-day MMA.
And it's a lot more comfortable than the new UFC fight gloves and the old UFC fight gloves and even the Pride replica.
So, did the UFC go with any of these options? Did they ask for input from any of these companies or even try to replicate them? No. Instead, they used the same equipment manufacturing company they used for the old gloves, Diaco, to basically redesign the current glove. And at first, it all seemed quite fancy.
Actually had them impact load cells and high pressure systems to basically bring that back to our lab and correlate that here.
But was it?
UFC is launching a revolution in combat sports technology. The new 3/8 glove.
The new gloves were shown to the world in June 2024, and first impressions seemed positive.
Looking at the glove, we were looking at everything from a standpoint of where are we and where do we want to be? Can we reduce lacerations and cuts, make it more comfortable for the athlete?
The opening press conference told us of new stitching.
All of the seams are on the inside, so there's no place for a laceration to occur from a seam.
New padding.
What kind of foam do you put in the foam stack and why? And so that back and forth went on for quite a while.
Rigorous testing.
Impact mitigation type of foam. It was just more or less a certain density that seemed to work well for fighting.
And they even said they asked the athletes for their input, which, if you know the UFC, is like finding a unicorn.
The testimonials and the guidance of the athletes all the way through. Every step of the way, whether it was the evaluation and the interrogation of the old glove to understand its pros and cons and how we've used that information to then obviously direct the ideation of the new glove. The athletes have been engaged throughout that whole process.
Fighters who tried on the glove had good first impressions.
At first glance and a first fit, I like them. I ain't mad at them.
And so I will probably say these gloves are a huge step in the right direction. Once again, look what we got here.
So, what went wrong? The new glove was first used at UFC 302, and in the post-fight press conference, most actually gave positive reviews.
I really liked the gloves. They kind of fit to your hand a lot better. My forearms weren't as exhausted, walking out.
But even some of the winners were not massive fans of the gloves. This ranged from Islam complaining about how quickly the material wore out whilst commending the gloves curve. In the coming months, fighters and fans who bought the gloves began to review them online and give their thoughts. A minor quibble with the glove was that it couldn't possibly have 4 ounces of padding on it, since the glove barely weighs 4 ounces itself.
3.9! The glove itself is 4 ounces. So if you want to tell me the padding itself is 4 ounces.
But others began to point out other problems with the new equipment. For example, the futuristic hidden stitching they bragged about seemed not so hidden after all.
And look, there's stitching fraying out here, there's stitching fraying out down here, there's stitching all around the bottom fraying out.
And the finger holes came so far away from the knuckle that they posed an increased risk of causing cuts.
How much that comes off from my fingers, you know what I'm saying? These come off really far from my outer knuckles here, right? So I do think that can cause a little bit more cuts.
Okay. But what about the main issue everyone had about eye pokes? Surely they at least fixed that right. They certainly said they would.
The devices have brought to the table with our slip planes allows the hand to sit in a much more natural kind of facing forwards.
Well, take a look for yourself and see if you think it would be possible to eye poke someone while wearing these gloves.
At the end of the day, I don't know how this glove was supposed to stop eye pokes either, because again, it's such a flat glove.
And I don't know about this whole curve thing. They don't really curve. I can still do that. And then...
Yeah.
The biggest problem for the UFC, however, wasn't necessarily people online voicing their opinions, but simply fans could tune in each week and see for themselves, fighters still getting cut from gloves. And you guessed it, still getting poked in the eye. Later that same year, Dana made the announcement before UFC 309 that they would be returning to using the old UFC gloves.
We had good intentions with them. They didn't work out. People weren't happy with them. So I actually made the decision, called our chief operating officer Lawrence and said, I'm switching the gloves. I want the old gloves back. So,
however, fans and media have learned to grow skeptical of the UFC and looked for a potentially more nefarious reason for the sudden change.
The multiple sources that I spoke to, no one was actually told the specific reason.
One popular theory was that prolific eye poke champion Jon Jones was being protected by the UFC in his upcoming title fight with Stipe.
Hey, is it possible that Jon tried these gloves on while he was in Las Vegas over the past week? We saw him at the event over the weekend and said, hey, I don't like these gloves. And I want the old gloves back for this massive fight.
Then it's highly suspicious, especially because Jon Jones, like you said, is essentially one of two fighters that can get their way on just about anything.
And although it was true that Jon had been very vocal regarding the gloves in the build-up to UFC 309,
they were very uncomfortable for me, and I was actually really stressed thinking about how am I going to go into fight week wearing these gloves that I don't even want to train in.
It seems more plausible that the UFC simply realized they had an inferior product, or at least one that made little to no improvements.
I would probably give these gloves like a 6.5, maybe 7. I definitely have had some better gloves with other promotions.
Besides, Jon never ended up eye-poking Stipe in their fight, and it's unlikely the UFC would throw away 5 years of research and millions of dollars in rebranding gloves just to trash them for a fighter with maybe one fight left before retirement. Not to mention the fact the main issue with the new glove is that it doesn't make it significantly harder to eye poke anyway. Regardless, fighters themselves seem either unbothered or relieved that the UFC will be returning to the old gloves either way.
Man, I do not want to use these gloves. Hitting these pads right now is not feeling good. I'm gonna hit a person with these, so I did not want to use them. So
the journey of UFC gloves highlights not just a quest for safety, but also the ongoing struggle between tradition and innovation in MMA. The recent switch back to the old gloves demonstrates that even after years of development, there's still much to learn and improve upon. Whether you're a fighter, a fan, or simply intrigued by the sport, it's clear that the evolution of MMA gloves is far from over. The problem now is that the UFC is unlikely to change the gloves again anytime soon, or even attempt to. But the question remains, could it be fixed?